the formal and official death of one of college football's great rivalries. Plus, conference realignment finally comes to the ACC, and Pitt adds another guard out of the transfer portal. We got a lot to cover on today's Morning Pitt, so let's jump into it here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's Tuesday. It's the regular week again. We're back after the holiday, although we had a Morning Pitt yesterday. Hopefully you got a chance to check that out. That was our day after the day after. Reflections on Pitt's game against Wofford. We did that little sort of mop up a few details and thoughts that we had left from Saturday's game. But now we're moving into game week, into week 2. Pitt against Cincinnati this week at Acrisure Stadium Saturday night. And we got a lot to talk about that game and a few other things that we got to kind of clean up from the weekend. Some news that came out over the weekend that we didn't get a chance to talk about. But, of course, first of all, you know what I got to ask you to do. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you'll never miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. These Morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday, a little Pitt sports talk to get your day started. We have our weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Me and Jim Hammock get together to talk a little Pitt sports. We do the live post-game shows. Did our first one of the season after the Wofford game. That was a lot of fun. And those post-game shows are always a lot of fun, win or lose. Get a beer and talk about the game. That's always a good time. So we enjoy doing those. And it's all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And if you're worried that you're going to miss some of it and you want to make sure you don't, skip a Morning Pitt or forget about a live stream or a post-game show or whatever it is, it's easy. Like this video and subscribe. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Subscribe button is right down there. And you can also turn on notifications so you get an alert sent right to your phone, and then you'll never miss any of the videos that we post here, the live streams that we do at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like and subscribe so you don't miss out. And then the website, of course, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com is the website you need to check out if you are looking for the best online community of Pitt fans. All right, Pitt-Cincinnati this week, Acrisure Stadium, Saturday night should be very interesting. Cincinnati had a blowout win of its own on Saturday. Pitt, of course, did as well. Both teams, I think, interested to find out who they really are against real competition. There's some familiar faces on both sides of the ball. Coaching staffs know each other. They've faced each other as recently as last year. There's a lot, of course, to get into on all those angles. But we got to start with some news that came from our friend Noah Hiles at the Post-Gazette. And he reported this yesterday, put it on Twitter, that the River City Rivalry is officially dead. The trophy will not be used for this game. The paddle wheel trophy that we all made fun of will not be used, and apparently it was a decision made prior even to this week. That when the Pitt-Cincinnati series resumed, it would not resume as the River City Rivalry, and it would not resume with the River City Rivalry trophy. And we like to have fun around here. We like to make with the jokes and tease about things and kid around. But the reality is, and I was thinking about this yesterday, the River City Rivalry packed some punch. All right, there were 8 years of the River City Rivalry from when Cincinnati joined the Big East in 2005 until Pitt's final year in the Big East in 2012. They played 8 games. They split the games evenly, 4-4. Pitt won the first 3, and then Cincinnati won 2, Pitt won 1, Cincinnati won 2. And out of those 8 games, the first 2 were pretty nondescript wins for Pitt. I sort of, remember Dave Wanstead, chirping after the Cincinnati game in 2005. Well, that's what we're supposed to do. In 2006, I think we interviewed Darrell Reeves, and he was like, it's Cincinnati. And so, pretty nondescript. And quite frankly, Cincinnati's 2 wins at the end of the series, 2011 against Todd Graham and 2012 against Paul Christ, were pretty nondescript in and of themselves. But the 4 games in the middle packed some punch. They really did. The 2007 game, everybody, 13-9 is obviously the crowning achievement of Dave Wanstead's time at Pitt, and it was his biggest win and signature win and all of that. The 2007 Cincinnati game, though, for the time when it happened, which was a few weeks, a month and a half or whatever before the West Virginia game, that was the biggest win of the Wanstead era. It really was. Pitt was 2-3 at that point. They were, reeling. I think this was the game after the Navy game. So, I mean, they were really hitting rock bottom at this point. And Cincinnati came in ranked. They were 6-1. They were number 23 in the nation. And Pitt beat them 24-17. Pitt went out and took care of business. LaShawn McCoy and LaRod Stevens-Howling rushed for, over 100 yards each. And they just generally had a big day, a big game that day, and got a huge win. Now, they didn't necessarily carry the momentum. I think they lost to Rutgers and Louisville over the next 2 weeks in games that were, kind of heartbreakers. If you recall, Rutgers, there was an offensive pass interference call on O'Derrick Turner in the end zone, and LaShawn McCoy fumbled at the goal line at the Louisville game. But either way, the Cincinnati game was a huge game. It was a turning point for that team, and I think it built their confidence of what they could do, because the confidence, I think, was waning after the first 5 games of that season. The ugly UConn and Virginia games, the Navy game, which was one of the rock bottom moments of the Dave Wanstead era. But they started building momentum out of the Cincinnati game. It didn't all come at once. They still only won 2 more games after the Cincinnati game. But they were able to, I think that was the springboard to the 13-9 game. And ultimately it was a huge game for Dave Wanstead. I mean, one of his probably 5 best wins during his years at Pitt. 2008 is a bit of a forgotten game, but this ultimately was a game that it was a huge game. It was late in the season. Pitt was ranked number 20 in the nation. They were 7-2 overall, 3-1 in the Big East. Cincinnati was number 19. They were, I think, 8-2 and 4-1, so they had played one more game than Pitt. But this was really, not as clear of a de facto Big East championship game as 2009 would ultimately be. But it was still, I mean, the conference was on the line. If Cincinnati won, they clinched the Big East. They would have been 5-1 at that point, but I think that would have given Pitt 2 losses. So even if they had lost their final game, they would have held the tiebreaker over Pitt. So that game was Cincinnati's opportunity to clinch the Big East championship and Pitt's opportunity to give itself a chance to win the Big East championship. The game was out there. Cincinnati was number 19. Pitt was number 20. It was a huge game. The final score was 28-21, probably closer than the game actually was. I don't think the game was actually as close as that final score would indicate. It was 28-7 heading into the fourth quarter. Pitt scored 2 touchdowns in the final 10 minutes to make it 28-21. But that game was, Cincinnati ended up winning the Big East at 6-1 in the conference. Pitt was 5-2 in the conference. Their only other loss was Rutgers. And it was a huge game. You know what I mean? Pitt still had 2 conference games after Cincinnati. So if they'd beaten the Bearcats, they would have had to beat West Virginia, which they did, and then go to UConn in the regular season finale and win, which they did. So the opportunity was there for Pitt to go 6-1 itself and win the Big East. That game in Cincinnati was a central one to the conference championship race, and ultimately a huge game in this rivalry. 2009 probably goes without saying. I'm not sure we really need to dig too deep on that game and what it meant and what was at stake, but we all know how huge that game was. We all know what that game meant, and we all know what happened in that game. How about Marty Gilliard, though? I know you don't want to talk about him, but in those 2 games, 2008 and 2009, because he had 100 receiving yards, 110 actually in 2008, those 2 games, 2008 and 2009, Gilliard combined for 13 catches for 228 yards and 2 touchdowns, plus the kick return touchdown. Marty Gilliard was cooking in the 2008-2009 River City Rivalry games. But then in 2010, like I said, the 11 and 12 games, pretty nondescript wins for Cincinnati. But the 2010 game was anything but nondescript. Cincinnati was well out of it at that point. Pitt has a chance to, I think they clinched a share of the Big East, but they had already been mathematically eliminated from winning the conference title after they lost to UConn and they lost to West Virginia. But they had a chance to clinch a share of the Big East. But if you remember that game, it was the regular season finale. It was out there. Snow everywhere, to the point where they had to plow the yard lines during timeouts. It was a crazy snow game. Dion Lewis ran wild. I think Pitt was wearing all white uniforms, so they're in the snow in all whites. The Bearcat mascot gets arrested for throwing snowballs at the crowd. It was that kind of day. They sat, after I'll never forget the post-game press conference. Dave Wanstead sitting there defiantly talking about how they are Big East champions and they won the conference championship, even though they lost the tiebreaker. So I mean, they weren't getting the BCS bowl bid. they clinched a share, and I think they actually might have had rings made for it. But it was just such a bizarro day, on all accounts, that it was remarkable. Even though it ended up being a Pitt win, 28-10 or something like that, pretty unremarkable score. It was a remarkable day because of how bizarre the whole thing was, and I think a lot of people around Pitt were just ready for that season to end after how some of those games had gone that year. The UConn game and the West Virginia game in particular, late in the season. But it was a weird day, and those 4 years in there of the River City rivalry. I mean, man, they burned bright and they burned fast. You know, it wasn't long, but pound for pound, that rivalry packed a serious punch. I mean, it was like the John Cazale of college football rivalries. You know what it was? It was actually, it was the Guns N' Roses of college football rivalries. It really was. Those 4 years made the River City rivalry the Guns N' Roses of college football rivalries. I mean, you think about, like, the 2007 game is like the appetite for destruction, right? Kind of comes out of nowhere. You know, there was Pitt came out of nowhere to win that game. Couple of heavy hitter performances, you know, like Sweet Child of Mine and Paradise City. They had LaRod and LaShawn rushing for 100 yards each, and then a bunch of strong plays and players and performances throughout, kind of filling out the depth of that album. 2008 is Lies. The 2008 Pitt-Cincinnati game is the album Lies. It's kind of forgotten. It's kind of overlooked, but you have kind of hidden in there really the debut of one of the great players in the River City rivalry history and one of the great songs in the Guns N' Roses catalog, Tony Pike and Patience. And coincidentally, Patience kind of applies with Doran Dickerson, who sort of made his, had his coming out party at tight end. At the very end, in the last 90 seconds, he caught a 41-yard touchdown pass in that game. It was one of the first big plays he made as a tight end after he switched there from playing linebacker the previous season. And it was sort of a harbinger of things to come. You just had to have a little patience with Doran at that point. And then 2009 and 2010 were kind of the Use Your Illusion albums, kind of fat, kind of bloated, and basically just had everything that you could possibly want. I mean, like, there was nothing you really didn't, there was nothing you could have wanted that you didn't get out of those two games and those two albums. And quite frankly, there were probably some things you didn't want that you did get from those two games and those two albums. I mean, big plays, great songs, some crazy ridiculousness on both fronts. I mean, the Bearcat getting arrested is basically getting the ring. I mean, that's effectively what it comes down to there. It's I had another good one. LaShawn McCoy, or not LaShawn McCoy, Elijah Fields whiffing on a tackle was breakdown. There's a lot of parallels I think you can draw if you're inside my head between the Use Your Illusion albums and the 2009-2010 River City rivalry games. But I sort of see it as, it's all there. It's a giant plate, and some of it's good and some of it's bad, but my God, it's all there. So, shout out to the River City rivalry, the Guns N' Roses, the John Cazale of college football rivalries. It burned bright, it burned fast, and unfortunately we won't have a reunion tour coming to PNC Park or Acrisure Stadium in this case anytime soon. So credit to Noah Hiles for reporting that news. We hate that you did it. All right. The news came on Friday, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it, obviously, on Saturday because we were doing a post-game show. Didn't get a chance to talk about it yesterday. This is different news. We're not talking about the River City rivalry anymore. But if I had a 40, I would pour some out for it. But we didn't get a chance to talk about it yesterday because we were sort of still recapping the Wofford game. Didn't want to stretch that too far into the week. But we do need to talk about it. The news came on Friday that the ACC went ahead and did it. They voted. They got 12 votes to invite Cal, Stanford, and SMU to join the conference, I think next year, right? Is that when this is happening, next year? So this non-division, 3 annual opponent rotating structure, schedule, format that they created for this year looks like it's only going to exist for 1 year, and then things are going to have to change around again. I mean, first of all, the first thing that stands out is, wow, NC State decided to go against North Carolina and vote on its own, like big kids. So look who's all grown up now wearing the big boy pants, the NC State Wolfpack. They're stepping out of line with North Carolina. But there's weird stuff with, like, North Carolina politics and the state university system between NC State and UNC. And I'm the kind of guy that just doesn't care. When it comes to the triangle and these North Carolina schools, man, I'm so tired of hearing about them, and I've been so tired of hearing about them for about 10 years now that I don't care about whatever feuding there might be between Carolina and NC State. I hope they cannibalize each other, quite frankly. Because it ultimately, it's interesting as a soap opera and little else. But they got the NC State vote. Obviously, Carolina, FSU, and Clemson voted against it. No surprise there. You guys are voting against the very scenario that you helped create because you goofballs wouldn't stop talking about how you want to leave the conference. It made no secret of the fact that you want to leave the conference. It made no secret of the fact that you intend to leave the conference as soon as you possibly can. You force the ACC's hand to have to go and add these teams. They added these teams for minimal revenue increase. I mean, you see some of the numbers online. It's just, maybe a few $1 million each year once the dust ultimately settles. But what they really added these teams for is security, so that when that time comes that Florida State, Clemson, and probably North Carolina leave, although, boy, wouldn't it be funny if Carolina got left out. But when those teams ultimately leave, which they will as soon as they can, the ACC will still have the numbers to be a 14 or 15 team conference, which should provide it the security to sustain, to be viable. And I think that's always been the ACC's goal is just to survive. And you could go back and forth about whether they should have been attempting to thrive. Should they have been more aggressive? Should they have been more predatory? Should they have been more proactive in going to get teams instead of waiting until their hand was sort of forced by Carolina and FSU and Clemson, that they had to go get a couple other teams just to keep the numbers up so when that time comes? You could have an argument about that. I don't hate the ACC's idealism that they could keep everybody together and keep everybody happy and stay at this 14/15 team conference for the long-term future. But now they've added some insurance. They've given themselves security in having those numbers. Now, is it an ideal situation? Is it great to have Cal and Stanford in this conference? I mean, SMU almost seems sort of reasonable by comparison. Is it a good thing? In terms of the short term, in terms of travel, in terms of the student-athlete experience, in terms of basically everything other than the long-term viability of this conference, which has short-term impacts, of course. But in terms of anything other than the long-term viability of the ACC, no, it's not really all that good. It's a minimal revenue increase that probably won't be entirely offset by travel costs, but is going to be cut into by travel costs. But you have to do what you have to do to survive. And this was the move for survival. This was the move for survival. Should the ACC have attempted to poach some of these Big 12 teams over the last few years? Possibly. Should the ACC and will the ACC make a move like that in the next few years as the Big 12 comes nearer to the end of its television contract? Yeah, probably. And they probably should. Maybe the ACC learned a lesson in here about not just survival, but, not just surviving, but thriving. And being aggressive and proactive and saying, well, we can at least keep ourselves as number 3. And, the next step to sustaining yourself and preserving yourself as number 3 is going to get more of those Big 12 teams when they become, somewhat poachable. So, to me, it's what they had to do. This is not any more ridiculous than just about any other conference realignment move we've seen in the last few years. And it's all because Florida State and Clemson and Carolina wouldn't shut up. That's what it comes down to. And I don't begrudge those schools. I don't begrudge those schools their intentions to leave or their reasons for leaving. It's fine. You got to do what you got to do to support your school. But if I'm the ACC, I'm sending their tails out to Palo Alto and Berkeley as often as possible. You guys want more money? Here, suck it up and spend as much. We're getting some extra revenue. You're going to spend every penny on flying out there. There's no appeasing those schools. I don't know if there ever were attempts or efforts to appease those schools, but if there were, they should be ceased immediately. Don't try to play, to curry favor with Florida State anymore. Don't try to curry favor with Clemson or Carolina anymore. They brought this situation on and then voted against it, tried to sabotage it. So, yeah, you guys, you can be persona non grata for a little while, or maybe the long term. I wouldn't try to, I mean, I'm all for not burning bridges, but I don't know if there's a lot to be gained by mending or attempting to mend those particular bridges. Really don't care. All right, and then the last thing, this kind of came out on Friday as well. Michael Hueitt, guard, transferring to Pitt. Pitt had a couple extra scholarships available. They had one, and then got another one after Dior Johnson was basically kicked out at Pitt, the university. And so there's no sense not using one or two of those scholarships. And so they did. They went and got Michael Hueitt, who's been at Old Dominion. He's been at UNC Greensboro. He's been at maybe McNeese State. He's been all over the place. He's played a lot of places. And he's going to come into Pitt as a guard. And I think, we're not going to overthink it with Hueitt. I'm not going to overanalyze it with Hueitt. I think he provides guard depth. You know what I mean? I think he provides depth at the 2. He's a decent three-point shooter. He played 13 games at Old Dominion about 6 years ago, literally. He shot 47% from 3. 2 years later, he played 30 games at UNC Greensboro, coming off the bench, and shot about 36% from 3. I think he's I've heard he's a good three-point shooter. I think that's what he can probably provide is guard depth off the bench, shooting off the bench, and just another guy to play against in practice. You know what I mean? Bub Carrington, Jalen Lowe. I mean, these guys need more seasoning. They need to be ready for the season. I didn't mean to say season or some version of it twice there, but you understand what I'm saying. They need to be ready for the season, and they're going to need to have veteran guards to play against in practice, that they can practice defending and that they can practice trying to drive on and score on. And so Hueitt does that. He brings in another veteran guard that can play against those guys and create some competition in practice and hopefully drive them to be better, help them be better, as you head toward the season. I don't think it changes much with Pitt's starting lineup. I don't think it changes the starting lineup at all. I'm not even sure how much it changes the rotation. He provides another depth piece at the 2 if you're not going to have Ishmael Leggett out there, or you want to have 3 guards, or Leggett ends up running the point or something like that. If you have foul trouble for Carrington or Lowe. I mean, this is who they were able to find. This is who they were able to get this late in the process. He got a waiver like 2 weeks ago. Pitt got on it pretty quick, and they're bringing him in now to be an extra guard on the bench. So, like I say, I don't think there's too much to dissect on that one. It's a matter of got an empty scholarship, bring in a guy who can fill out your roster a little bit. There's no sense not using it. So that's what they did. And they found somebody who can come in and play right now. He's older. He's a veteran player. He'll provide. He's been around a little bit of winning. I think Greensboro. UNC Greensboro in 2019, 2020 when he was there, they went 23-9. 13-5, finished third in the Southern Conference. I'm just looking at their season, see where they ended up. They just they didn't get any. They just went to the Southern Conference tournament. Didn't end up in the NCAA tournament. They won 23 games. They had a successful season. He was a part of it, so maybe he can bring some of that experience to Pitt. So we'll see what happens there. It doesn't really change my outlook for the team or the season or the key players they're going to be counting on, but he can get some minutes here and there. All right, as we move through the week, we're going to look more at Pitt Cincinnati on Saturday. We'll have a look at Whitfield recruiting, actually. We're going to have that coming up later this week. We'll have our mailbag on Friday, as always, so you get your questions in on Panther-Lair.com. If you have something you want to ask about Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, or anything else on your mind, get those questions on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And yeah, that's I think that about does it for us today. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure you check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you had a great Labor Day yesterday, and your week is off to a great start today. You enjoy your Tuesday. We'll talk to you again. You enjoy your Tuesday. We'll talk to you again tomorrow on the Morning Pitt, right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.